Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagatgurum. I salute Lord Krishna, the world teacher, the son of Vasudeva, the destroyer of Kamsa and Chanura, the supreme bliss of Devaki, his mother. We started previous talks with a bit about the nature of the world. So today I'm going to make a few more comments about that before getting into the rest of things. Remember, the world, the word they use, a jagat, means that which is ever-changing. We've talked about that aspect of it before. But today what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the dualities. The Sanskrit word for that is dvandva, and there are basically a couple of different types. There's the natural dualities that are like built in, hot, cold, day, night, east, west, those kinds of things. And then there are those that are human, the human element, basically largely around emotional issues. So some of these dualities are mutually exclusive, like east-west, you can't go, I suppose you could say middle. But a lot of them do have in-betweens. They're a whole spectrum. So when you say hot, cold, there's tepid and all kinds of things in between. So the thing, we can't do very much about the natural dualities. Those are just to be observed and experienced, whatever. But the human ones, such as attraction, repulsion, virtue, vice, happiness, unhappiness, difficult, easy, things like that, these we have more control over. And these are the ones that we work on as spiritual aspirants, because a lot of the problem comes from our labeling things. This is good, this is bad, whatever. And then you find out that what you think is good, somebody else doesn't think is good, or they even think it's bad, or so you begin to see that there's a lot of opinion comes involved in all of this kind of thing. So those are the ones that we need to be aware of and work with. So that's just my little note at the beginning about the nature of the world. And you'll see references, there are references to the dualities in the Gita and many, many, many other places. Now, in the Samkhya philosophy, which is the oldest philosophical system in the world, the mind is considered to be insentient. That is, it's an evolute of nature, and all of nature is divided into two manifestations. You have prana, which we loosely term energy, and akasha, which is matter. In practice, shall we say, prana is often associated with the breath, and that's one way you can grab hold of those kinds of energies in the body, and that's why they evolved this practice of pranayama, which I do not espouse because it isn't totally necessary. The breath can come under control as we do other kinds of spiritual practices. But the thing is, prana is closely associated with our emotions, so that's going to reflect the way that those human dualities are perceived and dealt with by us. So we have to get a little bit of an awareness, at least, of the fact that prana is operating, and that is largely why when we have just sort of thoughts floating around in our mind, that we're not controlling anything. They just kind of pop up and they go in and out, and things go around and around. though that is a manifestation of prana. And in the other scriptures, particularly the Yoga Sutra, thought, which they call vritti, is conceived of as coming in waves. And so the prana, shall we say, I don't know, it stirs up the waves somehow or other. This is not what you would call Western science, but this is kind of their labeling for what is happening. Now, I want to mention in this regard a story from the Chandogya Upanishad. And it's the story of the father, who's a teacher, but he sent his son off somewhere else to get educated, and then the son came back, and then the father decided, then the son asked, yes, I learned all these things, but I did not learn Brahman. I want to know how to find Brahman. So the father decides, okay, I'm going to teach him. So one of the, he has the boy go off and meditate again and again and come back. But one of the parts of the story, the one part of the story, is at one point, the son comes back and says he thinks that Brahman is prana. And the father says, okay, I would like you now not to eat for the next 15 days. And so he does not eat for 15 days. And so then he comes back and his father says, okay, now recite such and such for me. And he can't do it. His memory's gone. And he says, I can't do that. So the father points out, Udalakya, I don't know if I mentioned his name, but the father's name is Udalaka, points out that, therefore, prana is eliminated from your investigation as being the ultimate reality because it changes. So it cannot be the ultimate reality. So this just goes to show that there's a whole process involved in this, what Sri Ramakrishna called peeling the layers of the onion. You peel back more and more kinds of things and saying, no, okay, it's not that, it's something else, what is that something else? Okay, so going back to the Gita, Arjuna's original complaint that the mind wanders from the first chapter toward the end, I would say really should be more translated as probably it was going crazy in his case. The mind just, he was thrown. It wasn't the usual kind of thing for him. He was a warrior of great standing. He had performed many heroic feats, etc., etc. But it is in the nature of an unregulated mind to constantly churn its contents. On the other hand, a properly regulated, clean mind will stay quietly in abeyance unless and until it is called for. Now, we have to understand that most of us are dealing with an unregulated mind, or you could say uneducated, that's another word, when we take to spiritual practice. We don't even understand the extent to which our minds are unregulated until we start to practice. And then we think that something has gone wrong. But it hasn't gone wrong. It's just that we've now been observing what's been going on all the time, and that now we know the extent of the situation and now we bring some methods to deal with it. So I would like to tell another little story of a regulated mind. And that's from the Mahabharata. It's not in the Gita per se, but it's in the Mahabharata. And it's the story of a student, a young man, who wanted to learn archery. And he wanted very badly to learn archery. He was, however, a tribal, what they call a tribal person or an indigenous person of India. He was not part of the Vedic culture, and the best teacher was Drona. The best archery teacher was Drona. So he approached Drona, but you see, Drona was the royal archery teacher. He was committed to educating the young princes in the Kuru clan how to, all the different techniques of archery. So this young man got turned down. So he said, okay, I really, really, really want to learn archery. So he went back to wherever he had come from in the forest or whatever, and said, okay, Drona is still going to be my teacher whether he knows it or not. Okay. So I think he made like a little statue or something and said, okay, this is Drona. Now here's my teacher, and I'm going to learn archery. And he did. He set about learning every conceivable way to use bow and arrow. And he got so good over time that he actually was better than Arjuna, who was considered the best in the world. And he was discovered in the forest one day, and Drona, was the real Drona, was there, and saw the display, and was appreciative and all this kind of stuff. But you see, this young man had taught himself. He had a regulated mind. He had an educated mind. He knew how to, because archery is not just a physical thing. It's a mental process. It's a mental focus. So he had taught himself. And Drona said, very good, very good. Okay, now, and this was at Arjuna's suggestion, shall we say, you need to give me my guru dakshina, my payment, for being your teacher. Anything. So the young man says, anything. So he says, I want your thumb. Now, it's rather difficult to pull without a thumb. So, but he was committed to his teacher, and he gave him his thumb. He still became, or I should say, remained an excellent archer. But he felt that it was worth it. And in that system, you owe the teacher something, and that was the payment that the teacher wanted. So that's what because the teacher could have said, oh, go shoot me an elephant or something, and or a deer, and feed everybody here, but he didn't. So this young man doesn't appear later in the story of the Mahabharata at all, but it's there for a reason. And what is that reason? The reason is to show us that we think we need teaching from the outside, but we don't. We get the teaching really from the inside. And that's what this young man, with his regulated, educated mind, knew and took advantage of. And that's kind of how, in ancient times, things pretty much worked, pretty much across the board. I'm talking about cultures around the world. People had more of a sense of who they were and what they could do, without reliance on gadgets. Okay, now, we're talking today about the mind and thought. In the Indian context, a word that they use a lot of times is doubt. But that's the same word that we would just say thought, okay? Or, because what they're saying is, I'm unsure, I'm unsettled, my mind is wavering, I don't know what's what, really. I can't decide, fundamentally, is what doubt means. And thought, if you look at the word thought I'm talking about. If you look at other words for the same thing, you could say ponder, speculate, weigh, reason, calculate, deduce, deliberate. There's all these words, but they also mean pretty much the same thing. I don't really know. So I'm weighing it. I'm ruminating on it. I'm deliberating about it. Deliberation means go back and forth, okay? So this back and forthness is called doubt in the Indian context. Now, Krishna, in the Gita, at least at the very beginning, wants to move Arjuna from that kind of movement of thought, of the mind, to something that's more self-reflexive or introspective. Okay, so get him to not focus so much on what's out there and going to happen, but what his connection is to the divine. And he does that over this whole series of 700 verses. It doesn't happen right away. Now, this is interesting because the Gita comes somewhere around 200 BC, between 200 BC, 200 AD, something like that. Nobody can really pin it down. Buddha had come about 500 BC, but 600 BC in China was Lao Tzu. And in he's fun. We usually consider of him as, know of him in relation to the Tao. He was the one who expounded the Tao. But he wrote another tome called the Hua Hu Qing, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly because I never studied Chinese. And I just want to give a little, he has a little something to say about this. He says, knowledge creates doubt, and doubt makes you ravenous for more knowledge. You can't get full eating this way. The wise person dines on something more subtle. So I think that's very interesting because I never ran across anything like that before. Knowledge creates doubt. Knowledge creates doubt. Doubt makes you ravenous for more knowledge. You can't get full eating this way. The wise person dines on something more subtle. So, this is basically a Gita class, so we're going to go next to the Gita. And I'm going to go through, in English translation, quite a few of the verses in relation to this idea of how the mind functions and what it is that we need to try and do. And I'm taking it from the Bhavananda translation, starting in second chapter, verse okay. I don't think it's important to talk about the verses. But anyway, he says, this is Krishna speaking, the excited senses impetuously carry away the mind of even a wise one striving for perfection. Just as a gale pushes away a ship on the waters, the mind that yields to the roving senses carries away his discrimination. But he excels who, restraining the senses by the mind, unattached, directs his organs of action to the path of work. Now this is interesting because this is where he's introducing the idea of what came to be called karma yoga later, and this is what Swamiji grabbed onto in his very first work that he wrote, which was Karma Yoga. Arjuna asks in chapter 3, what compels one to commit evil as if by force? And Krishna answers, desire and anger. Knowledge is covered by this insatiable fire of desire, the constant foe of the wise. Therefore, mastering first the senses, slay it, the sinful destroyer of knowledge and realization. Slay the desire. Thus, knowing that which is superior to the intellect, restraining the self, small s, by the self, large S, slay the enemy in the form of desire, difficult to overcome. So you see, he's changing the point of view. What exactly is the enemy? Is it those people lined up over there that we're looking at? Or is it what's compelling this whole thing to happen to begin with, which is the insatiable desire, particularly in those the Kurus, such as Duryodhana and his father. His father was completely the most desirous of having his people on top. So the real enemy is the desire. Now, he's going to try and tell him how to go about reining it in, what to do. If you happen to be the one who is consumed with the desire, then this is how you go about, and not just desire, but we mentioned other things as well. Sitting there on his seat, making the mind one-pointed and restraining the thinking faculty and the senses, one should practice yoga for self-purification. So, coming up now is the essence of the instruction on how to meditate. But to tell the truth, there's really not enough detail, practical detail given here, which is why we need teachers to flesh it out for us a little bit more. Basically, his idea of how is really more what is to be done. Abandoning without reserve all desires born of sankalpa means intention, and curbing in by the mind all the senses from all sides. With one's intellect set in firmness, let one attain quietude little by little. With the mind fixed on the self, let him not think of anything. So this is a formless meditation, and in other places he talks about one-pointedness, and certainly in the Yoga Sutras, one-pointedness is, earlier here he mentioned one-pointed in 2 verses ago. There's two kinds of meditation. The one-pointed meditation is when you are focused on some meditative object. It can be your guru, your ishta, whatever. That's called one-pointed focus. You're trying to develop that so that the mind holds on to that image and doesn't move from it over time. You learn how to do that. And then there's this formless meditation where he ends up saying, don't think of anything. That is the mind, there's no form in the mind whatsoever, and what we're just delving into what's there, what is the sort of like the depth of the you're looking into the depth of the ocean where there's no light. Or you can put light there and say, okay, I'm going to look at the inner light. But fundamentally, there's no focus to it. It's more of a overall darkness or light, or however you want to put it. Some people put sound in there, whatever that focus is. By whatever cause the wavering and unsteady mind wanders away, let him, with the mind not wandering after anything else, made steadfast in the yoga of constant practice, one who meditates on the supreme, resplendent spirit reaches him. Reaches that spirit. They usually make it a masculine. What this indicates is this supreme, resplendent spirit means this person has transcended nature. And this is what Swamiji used to talk about, but see, unfortunately he used the words going against nature, which makes it sound like, oh yeah, we do all that all the time, conquer nature, you go out there and, mow down a whole forest or, whatever, that's conquering nature. No, that's not what Swamiji meant. Swamiji meant transcending nature, peeling off those layers of the onion, or going up the chain, shall we say, from the most gross to the subtle, and then beyond the subtle. That's what's going against nature. So since I mentioned Swami Vivekananda, I want to bring out the fact that when he came to the United States, there was, at that time, first of all, there was a lot of, in the latter half of the 19th century, there was a lot of spiritual foment in the United States. There were new sects coming up. It was, shall we say, religiously a potpourri. There was a lot of things happening, lots of new movements, etc. And one of those was the New Thought movement. The New Thought movement emphasized the power of the mind and positive thinking to influence health, relationships, and overall well-being. Okay, it's not to transcend nature. On the other hand, it's very much used to fulfill desires. Okay, so the key features of this New Thought movement was that it began in the mid-19th century, and it was started by a mental healer who developed the concept that illness is a matter of mind, which he explored through hypnosis and other studies. And the movement that started from there emphasized the power of the mind over matter and the importance of positive thinking to achieve health, success, and spiritual enlightenment. It promoted the idea that thoughts and attitudes shape the world and that individuals possess a God-given faculty to change their lives through positive thinking. New Thought adherents believed that sickness is the result of the failure to realize the truth of the oneness with the infinite intelligence or God. Healing, therefore, was accomplished by the affirmation of oneness with that infinite intelligence. Later on, the New Thought movement influenced the development of organizations like Unity, religious science, divine science, etc. But all of these ideas, such as the power of positive thinking, have become embedded in mainstream Christianity in the United States and have been adopted and repeated by generations of opinion leaders to the point where the movement's emphasis on personal power and the ability to manifest desired outcomes has influenced the whole prosperity gospel movement. Now, we have to understand, this is part of the whole milieu in which we grew up. And so this is now part of the contents of our minds. The whole self-help movement and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. But what I'm saying is, and this is what I said to myself, because I used to read, like when I was about 25 years old, I was reading self-help books. And it was like, finally I said to myself, why should I put all this time and energy into perfecting my so-called self? Why don't I put that same time and energy into realizing the truth? I mean, why polish up something that is temporary? It's going to go, okay? So let's go for what's not temporary. Let's go for what's the truth that's permanent, okay? So now, into this milieu comes Swamiji. Okay, Swami Vivekananda significantly influenced the New Thought movement through his teachings on Vedanta and yoga, emphasizing the inherent divinity within each soul and the power of thought to manifest reality, which resonated with the movement's focus on self-empowerment and spiritual growth. So to a certain extent, they thought he was talking about what they were talking about, but actually he really wasn't exactly. Because Vivekananda taught that each soul is potentially divine, and the goal is to manifest this divinity through various paths, like work, worship, or psychic control. Vivekananda emphasized the power of thought and its ability to shape reality, which was a concept central to New Thought's focus on positive thinking and manifestation. And his message of universal brotherhood and the unity of all religions appealed to their interfaith and inclusive approach. His first book, Raja Yoga, was Raja Yoga. I'm sorry, it wasn't Karma. Karma Yoga came later. Focused on the teachings of meditation and self-realization, which resonated with the New Thought movement's interest in practical spiritual practices. But you see, their practical was applying it to get what they want. They never quite, I think, made the leap to, wait a minute, if you're really gonna talk about supreme divine reality and God, shouldn't it be about what God wants? Not what I want? Anyway, so Vivekananda put his thumbprint on all of that movement and went forward. But he became disillusioned too, because he realized people weren't quite getting it. I mean, he did realize that. Now, right again, about that time, there was a book that came out, a very, very little book called As a Man Thinketh. And that's taken from the scriptures, I believe, from the Bible somewhere. As a man thinketh, so his heart is. You are what you think. That's kind of a basic thing in Christianity. Now, I said last time that content isn't so important, it's process. But I am going to talk about content today, and we'll talk about process another time, because content is, I would say, less important than process, but it is still important. And I'm going to quote from both Paramananda, who was the Swami from, one of the first Swamis who came to the United States after Vivekananda had passed away. And he was a young man, and he spent decades here, and he founded various ashrams, and some of them didn't last very long, and some of them lasted much longer, etc. But he wrote a lot of books, and they were very popular, and he was also a very sought-after lecturer. I mean, thousands of people used to come to his lectures, and he would travel by train across country, back and forth, over and over again, speaking to large crowds. So I don't know at what point he may have delivered this particular message, but this is a few words from Paramananda. And it's so true that I just thought, I don't want to make it sound like it's coming from me. It may seem incredible that anyone should create what is detrimental to his own well-being. Yet, we are continually doing this, unconsciously, subconsciously, and sometimes consciously. We have the power to change our mental focus. Mind forms habits. It also is very susceptible to outer influences. It takes their tincture, we can become so strong that nothing can impose its influence on us if we do not desire it. How do we become strong? By thinking, rethinking, and constantly thinking of that which is strong, spiritual, and exalted. Everything exists in the mind. There are no accidents. People mold their lives and determine the state of their own consciousness. So, again, he's talking about consciousness. He's not talking about getting something material on material plane. Now, the other Swami I would like to do a quote from is Swami Sridharananda, who I talked about a bit last time. Ignorance of my true nature is the cause of misery. Forgetfulness is a power emanating from the divine. Now, this is interesting. He's taking the hymn, the Chandi hymn, and he's to the Devi in the form of, and then you put namastaste, namastaste, I bow down again and again to the Devi. So he is translating a word that usually is translated as forgiveness, and he's calling it forgetfulness, which I think is really interesting because we have this saying, forgive and forget, okay, and he's kind of linked those in a way, because if you forget let's say something hurtful, that somebody did or something like that, then the mind isn't going to go around and around and around about it anymore. You've conveniently just wiped it off. No, not going there. So forgetfulness can play a very important role in our spiritual development because it helps us weed out those things that are for our benefit and those things that are not. Okay? So if it's not for our benefit, we can just say, well, okay, forget that. I'm not going there. That's not for me. Okay, to continue with Sridharananda. He's talking about avidya, that is another word for ignorance or non-knowledge, okay? For example, he says, the thoughts, I am incapable, inadequate, unworthy, so I try to run away from something. So these thoughts color our perspective, and number one, color the perspective, and number two, create something that's not true. This is a manifestation of Maya Shakti. That is, it's like a mirage. These things are not true because, now I'm not going to talk about him right now. I'm not going to quote him, I should say. Because if we are spirit primarily and unlimited, then all of these thoughts of I'm incapable, inadequate, etc., they have nothing to stand on. They're just aberrations of the mind. So he continues, words are important. Vibration is part of your psychic system. Take advantage of that. Use the divine name. Desaturate yourself from negative or useless thoughts and resaturate with this. Let the mind develop an emotional involvement with that spiritual ideal. Talk to the mind nicely. Say to it, listen, dear. This is the way Sridharananda talks, I love it. Listen, dear, you can't go there anymore. I'm not going to let you go there. So, talking about mantra, use the word as a stimulus or an anchor for your thinking. Think ennobling ideas. Possibly use the name and form or just an awareness of presence. Repeat that word in a rhythmic pattern linked to your breathing. This is the basis of dhyana yoga, that is meditation, which follows later. Because if you have an unregulated mind, you can't really meditate. Imagine today can be reality tomorrow. Imagination today, can be reality tomorrow. And then he gave some physical manifestations of that. For instance, the idea of going to the moon, going under the sea, all that kind of stuff at one point was science fiction. And then it became real in the physical sense. So we can so train and purify our mind that no matter where life places us, we shall be able to adjust ourselves. I'm going to restate. Okay. From Sri Dharananda, let the mind develop an emotional involvement with that ideal. The emotional involvement Sri Dharananda refers to is actually comes down to this Sanskrit word bhavana, which is translated as development, cultivating, producing. It can also mean calling into existence or manifestation. Bhavana is key in Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. It may create a specific mood or feeling at the beginning of practice. In Pali, which is the equivalent language that the Buddhists use to Sanskrit, it's literally means calling into existence. Okay, so this is what I want to say. In our terminology today, it goes a little bit beyond conceptualization or ideation, and it's actually creative imagination. It is, they tell you when you're doing a one-pointed meditation, let's say you're focused on your ishtam, your penultimate goal is to make that a living presence. So you do that by, it's funny. We seem to think that it's just going to sort of like happen. No. You have to use bhavana. This is something that you do. It isn't just a concept. It's something that you do. It's a creative imagination. You actually bring that image to life in yourself. By focusing intently and also with this emotional feeling that goes along with it. It's not just like a visual, a visualization. It's a visualization with involvement. Your whole being is involved in that. So this is bhavana, this creative calling into existence within yourself the divine presence. And you can then also use that in the formless meditation, because the feeling tone is still there. You keep that feeling tone, but then there's no form. Okay? So this is how people over the millennia have molded their lives into a spiritual powerhouse, shall we say. And it may not even be apparent to others that this is going on. But don't get discouraged. I mean, we have to start from where we are, and most of us start at a very not good place. The whole reason I think that most people get initiated is that they simply realize, I got to do something because my mind is driving me crazy. Okay, so if that's where we're starting, and most of us do, it means we have to wade through a whole lot of things in the meantime. But if you can just grab on to this, in addition to weeding out your unwanted thoughts, whatever, then your whole life can become changed. Now, okay, so since most of us come to spiritual life realizing first, which is a good, don't get me wrong, it's a good step. If you can realize, my mind is a mess, I need to do something, my mind is a mess, therefore my life is a mess, then you're far ahead of a lot of other people who keep blaming something out there for the problem. Okay, because take hold of the problem. The problem is here. Right? So meditation, we call it meditation, but for most of us, it just means mental housekeeping. And we may remain at this level for a long time. This is a kind of a preliminary level. According to the Yoga Sutras, there are 3 levels. Dharana, which is concentration, that's where we begin. We try and concentrate. Now, I might only be able to concentrate on the divine form, let's say, for 3 seconds before it wanders off somewhere, goes somewhere else. And then, after a couple of years, maybe it'll be 10 seconds. Oh, wait, the divine form was there for like 10 seconds. Whoa, or whatever. What I'm saying is you will begin to see incremental changes. Next, the next step, according to the Yoga Sutras, is dhyana, which is meditation itself per se, which they define as an unbroken flow of the mind toward its object, its chosen object. And then samadhi is the 3rd level, which means complete union or absorption in that, so that there are no longer 2. Okay, there's only 1. So we try repeatedly to focus on the Lord in whatever aspect we have chosen, but we continuously, in the beginning, need to deal with other things that pop up. Now, these other things that come up are a signal that you need to deal with whatever that is, particularly if it's something that comes up frequently, something from childhood or something from, it's usually, something negative. I mean, people don't usually complain about, birthday cakes and, nice stuff. They complain about things that bother them. So we need to process those things thoroughly and fearlessly, to feel it and experience it, and then let it go, come back to the moment, go back to your meditation, and you do this over and over again. To do this, we notice things before, as they arise, before they become full-blown. You eventually get to the point where you realize something that I have already eliminated several times in the past. It's going to come up again now. I mean, you get a feeling, okay, there it comes again. And you say, no, thank you. In meditation practice, you slow things down, and that allows you to see the subtle arisings. You catch things when they are manageable. Understanding, examining, knowing, slowing down, these are the first steps in dealing with the mind. you possess, believe it or not, you may not have thought of this, a very potent ability. You can consider it as a weapon if you want, and that is the laser stare. Whatever unwanted thing you want, it comes up, not that you want, it comes up, you just stare at it. And then it will realize it's unwanted, and it'll just kind of slink away in shame. And this is true. This is how it works. This is how it works. But all this mental stuff, remember, is preliminary, because the real task is to alter your self-identity and ultimately to eliminate the individual, so-called individual self altogether. So but it's worth it. It's interesting. The whole process is very interesting. And we do improve, do we not? It gets better, right? It gets better. Okay. Okay, so I got like 10 minutes. Anybody want to ask questions pertinent to the discussion? Yes. Sorry?
I wondered if Samkhya was an example of bhavana. The word Samkhya.
No.
No, it would not be.
No. Sankalpa. Is sankalpa the same thing as bhavana? No. Sankalpa is a stated intention or purpose. And bhavana is a whole involvement in.
So it's more emotionally related.
Yes.
Samkhya.
Yes.
Would the Samkhya be the result of what an emotional bhavana would be?
Sankalpa has to do with the will. I'm going to do X, and I'm making a statement. I'm going to do X. Whatever that is.
I'm sorry, is the other one the work?
The other one is your
The actual doing of it?
It might be the result that you come to.
no, sankalpa is usually more external. It's well, I haven't, let me think about it. I haven't really thought about the two of those things, how they interact, possibly. It is a good question, now that you raised that. But I'll have to take let me write it down. I'll have to take a, what do you call it? Rain check. Sankalpa and bhavana. Okay, I'll think about that. Okay, did I have another hand? Yes. Can't see very well.
When I first started meditating, and I was only doing like 5 or 10 minutes, a while, 2 years ago or something, I had like all these different thoughts that I just realized like, oh, my mind would go there, and it would go there, and there, and it was consistent. So then I decided when I started meditating that I would just like write down whatever it was my mind went to, and then I did another meditation where I just like went through the list of the things that I wrote down. And so I guess that was probably like the laser stare, because then it helped those thoughts not come back because I'd given myself time with them.
Yeah, I've heard of journaling. Yeah.
And then doing that, but then I haven't done it. I haven't done it in like 2 years where I've like been like, okay, this is something that my mind goes to when I meditate. But do you know when that's a meditation practice that's useful or not? Because we're not supposed to dwell on things that are negative or
Correct.
things like that. So how do you know when that's a good practice to utilize?
Well, I would, I was never inclined to do that, but I think I have heard of some people using journaling, to help them along. But you're right, you don't want to focus on it. But it is an interesting thing that, let's say you did it on an infrequent basis. Let's say every 2 weeks you make a note. Okay, and then over a period of a couple of years, you realize that those things are coming up less and less frequently. Those things that you're, and then ultimately, everything's inside anyway. You don't have to depend on the external note. But it might help you as a validation, say, oh, it is working to a certain extent, you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so that practice wouldn't be as useful for someone who's just like, oh, sometimes I think about lunch, sometimes I think about what I'm going to do today or yesterday. It's probably more helpful for someone who might have consistent thoughts. That like, this keeps coming up, I need to just look at this in the face.
Yes.
And let it creep away.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Another question,
Okay, hold on. Yes, go ahead.
the quote that you were quoting from Paramananda,
Yes.
regarding to forgiveness versus forgetfulness. We come back into birth. Why would there be a need for forgiveness? I mean, who would we be forgiving, ourselves, or certainly not the divine? I mean, but would there be a
Somebody who wronged you.
well, certainly if you're forgiving in your own personal life, does allow you a certain level of forgetfulness so that you can release what doesn't serve you.
Correct.
But,
Release what doesn't serve you, she said. That's true.
yeah, in essence, so if that forgetfulness is more like a tool, how does it become a process of a necessity for when we are given birth? I mean, couldn't we forgive without forgetting? I mean, I certainly have not
Oh,
forgotten an
well,
act.
yes, of course. Of course. Yeah, I mean, that's why they say forgive and forget. They're two different things in a way. Although that one word in Sanskrit, they can translate either way. So it's a method, as you say, of letting go. Either way, you want to translate it. It's just this doesn't serve me. I let go of it. Yeah. Okay. Namostu te vyasa vishala buddhe pulara vindayatra patra netra yena tvaya bharata taila purna prajvalito jnanamaya pradipaha. Salutations to thee, O Vyasa, that is the author of the Mahabharata and the Gita, of profound intellect and with eyes like the petals of a full-blown lotus, by whom the lamp of knowledge, filled with the oil of the Mahabharata, has been lighted. We'll have to talk about Vyasa one of these days. Okay. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.